We're rolling.
Email.
Email. Oh yes. Well, email was invented by Ray Tomlinson, MIT guy, who invented it in 1971, and he, it was basically an application that people could run on the sort of the newly connected computers. Computers were internet. Well, actually, the first networking success on the ARPANET was in 1969. So, they'd gotten the bugs worked out of actually physically connecting the computers, and so now it was time to use it for something. So he invented a very, very crude mailing system called email system, and his first email were basically test messages. He says that they were eminently forgettable, but a typical message he claimed, and I'm sure this is right, is it was like QWERTY UEAP, which is basically the sequence of letters across the top of the keyboard, QWERTY, UIOP. So that was the message, because he just needed some text in there, right? He's working out the protocols of what's happening in the software, and so he needs some message, and so he ran his fingers across the keyboard, I suspect, and presto, you've got a message. So that was his first one.
Do you know if there have been any estimates about how many emails are sent a day, a year?
There are estimates. I don't know what they are. It's actually interesting because it's email has people were conjecturing the demise of email a few years ago with all the other textbook texting and Facebook and all these other technologies available. But in fact, I think because it's being used so extensively in business at this point that it's really very, very popular and continues to become more and more popular. But I have no idea how many messages it is. So it's a big deal. I don't remember my own first email message. I'm with Tomlinson on this. I think they were eminently forgettable, but I suspect it probably was something like, "This is a message," and I'm sitting probably next to the guy who I'm communicating with because we're trying it out. It's like 1972, and here's this fancy new software that we can send mail back and forth to one another in, and the computer that's doing all this is sitting in the same room that we are, and so forth. So it was pretty basic, but I think I do know that by '79 I was a daily email user. So that was I'm pretty certain about that date, and it was, I think since then it's basically been sort of a required technology that you need it for lots of stuff, and you basically have almost, I don't want to say organized your life around it, but it's a key component of your communication.
So before email, we had the telegraph, obviously, but the telegraph did not eliminate snail mail. Mm-mm. Snail mail was the main way of doing most. Well, I mean,
and phones. Telephone was yes.
But for like written documentation, right?
Yes.
Because we also use it not just to communicate, but to document.
Right.
That's like a 3-day process.
Right.
Compared to an essentially instant process.
Exactly.
How do you think that has impacted the psyche of all the people communicating?
Oh man, things have sped up like mad, and I think the ability, right? So the fact that we can do electronic communication and get it turned around. In the early days of my academic career, for example, we would write papers to submit to conferences and journals and things like that. Well, if there was a deadline, the deadline would be say June 1st. And a lot of times but there was a certain amount of slack built into the process so that, everybody could mail in their papers to be reviewed. And so even though the deadline was the 1st of June, that meant that they had to be in the mail. But, when were they actually received? Well, who knows? So, and it was the days before FedEx, so, it was really just the mail system of the various countries, because, this is really an international problem, not just the United States. So a lot of times, you submit your paper, and, if you could submit it and sort of get it to its deadline a whole lot faster, you could have days and days and days of additional time to work on this thing, because you just knew that you could kind of pretend that the mail was slow. So, although it arrived 2 weeks late, well, that was it was only delivered in 2 days, but you took 10 additional days to work on it. So now we have electronic submissions of everything. People write their papers in PDF and they do the submissions. And so when the deadline is not June 1st, but it's midnight June 1st, and then they specify what time zone it's in, and then people submit their papers, and it has to be time stamped by the computer by that point. So people are working on up to like the minute before they actually hit send, and it gets delivered. So there's this expectation that we have much more compressed period. There's no slack built into any of these deadlines and so forth, or because everybody can deliver it electronically. And I think that has actually increased stress on lots of people. I mean, things just ran slower years ago, and email was a key contributor to that, because you ask a question, if you had to actually write it out and send it by mail, as you say, it would take several days, and then you get your answer back in the several days, and it had to be typed up and on and on and on and on. So yeah, I think that's added. It's shortened the time in which everybody expects turnaround, and has raised, I think, a lot of pressure to get things done faster and faster and faster.
Email's like texting.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Because postal system
Mm-hmm.
is asynchronous.
Yes.
It's not as efficient as the telephone.
Yes.
But
right. So the forms of communication. So, right, text and email, for example, are asynchronous. What does that mean? That means that the receiver doesn't actually have to be in the mode of receiving at the same time that the sender is doing the sender. As we know, you write out your text, it goes over the wire, and then it gets to the receiver, and when the receiver gets around to it, they look at the text. So that's an asynchronous communication, unlike telephone, where that's a synchronous communication. Both the sender and receiver have to be online at the same time, so they have to synchronize in time. It's tough on time zones, so that's what makes the text and email better, because they're asynchronous in that they'll wait for you. And written communication, as in postcards and letters and so forth, are the same thing. And synchronous gets you faster results, but it requires more coordination between both ends of the conversation. So, I think actually there will always be space for both of them, because there are times when you want to make I'm at the store. Am I going to pick anything up? You're not going to stay at the store, so you need to have that answer right away. That would be a good thing to do with the phone call, but. Text, well, there's lots of times when you just don't have to get the answer back right this minute. So
the internet, of course, it does have synchronous too.
Yes.
You talk to your son and daughter-in-law every week.
Right. So people use iChat and all forms of chatting on the internet. Exactly, because it's capable of supporting that. The internet, the internet's just an underlying communication technology, so it can support either synchronous or asynchronous communication, and it does both. And in fact, there's the line gets blurred. Your answering machine ends up making a phone call an asynchronous activity too, right? Because it's going to capture whatever the person wants to say and save it until you see it later. So that's how we sort of built in a little bit of resilience into the synchronous communication, but we don't necessarily get our same results. So. Yes.
That's email.
Okay, that's email.